Beloved, there are seasons in life when God chooses to bless His children in ways that are quiet, unexpected, and deeply personal. When money comes from God, it is not noisy. It does not announce itself with pride or demand attention. It arrives with peace. It comes carrying responsibility. And it comes with a divine instruction written silently in the heart. Stay humble, stay wise, and stay quiet. Many people pray for financial breakthrough, but few are prepared for the test that comes with it. Poverty can test your patience, but prosperity tests your character. When God opens a door of provision, He is not only answering your prayer, He is observing your heart. Will you use this blessing to glorify Him, or will you use it to glorify yourself? That is why wisdom is more important than the money itself. Money without wisdom is dangerous, but money with God's wisdom becomes a tool for blessing. When God blesses you, you do not need to explain it to everyone. Not everyone can understand what God is doing in your life. Some people will celebrate you, but others will secretly envy you. Silence protects the blessing. Wisdom preserves it. The moment you begin to boast, to display, to compare, you open the door to pride, pressure, and unnecessary spiritual attacks. God's blessings grow best in humility. There is a difference between money earned only by human effort and money entrusted by God. When it comes from God, it carries purpose. It is not just for comfort, it is for stewardship. God watches how you manage little before He gives much. If you can be faithful in quiet obedience, He will trust you with greater influence. Wise believers understand that provision is not ownership, it is assignment. Staying quiet does not mean hiding in fear. It means walking in discernment. It means knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Even Jesus often withdrew from the crowd after miracles. He did not chase applause. He understood that God's work does not need human advertising. When God lifts you, He does it at the right time, in the right way, before the right people. Wisdom also teaches us to seek God more after the blessing, not less. Many fall away because they prayed until the money came, then stopped praying. But the blessing was never meant to replace God. It was meant to draw you closer to Him. The wise person increases prayer, increases gratitude, and increases generosity. That is how the blessing stays clean and protected. Remember this, what God gives, He also sustains. But He sustains what is handled with humility. Stay grounded. Stay teachable. Keep your heart soft before God. Let your life preach louder than your lifestyle. When money comes from God, walk carefully, speak gently, and live wisely, because God is preparing you not just for provision, but for purpose. When God blesses a person financially, the blessing itself is never the final goal. It is the beginning of a deeper examination of the heart. Many people think money is the reward, but in God's kingdom, money often becomes the test. Before the blessing came, there were prayers, fasting, tears, and dependence on God. But once the breakthrough arrives, the question becomes very simple. Will the person still trust God, or will they start trusting the blessing? This is why financial provision reveals character more clearly than lack ever could. When someone is struggling, humility comes easily. Dependence on God feels natural. But prosperity introduces choices that were not there before. Pride begins to whisper, self-sufficiency starts to grow, and gratitude can slowly fade if the heart is not guarded. God watches closely in this season, not to take the blessing away, but to see whether the believer understands why it was given in the first place. The money is not a sign that God approves of everything. It is a responsibility placed in human hands. Character is revealed in how the blessing changes behavior. Does prayer become shorter or deeper? Does generosity increase or decrease? Does the person remain teachable, or do they begin to feel above correction? God looks at these small shifts. Many people fail this test not because they become openly sinful, but because they become quietly independent from God. The danger is not wealth itself. The danger is forgetting the source. God's blessing is also a test of obedience. There are moments when God prompts the heart to give, to help, or to invest in something that does not bring immediate personal benefit. In those moments, character speaks louder than words. Obedience after the blessing proves that the heart is still surrendered. If a person can obey God when it costs something, it shows that money has not taken God's place. Financial blessing also tests relationships. It reveals how a person treats others when they no longer need. True character remains kind, patient, and respectful regardless of status or resources. God desires His children to reflect His nature in every season, especially in abundance. In the end, money from God is not proof of spiritual maturity. It is an invitation to grow into it. Those who pass this test learn that blessing is safest when carried with humility, gratitude, and a constant awareness that everything still belongs to God. When God releases a blessing, especially financial provision, it often arrives quietly because it is meant to be protected, not displayed. Silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. Many blessings are damaged not by lack of faith, but by too many words spoken to the wrong people. When you announce everything God is doing in your life, you unknowingly expose the blessing to pride, envy, comparison, and unnecessary spiritual pressure. What God gives in secret is meant to grow in secret. Pride is one of the fastest enemies of divine provision. The moment a person begins to talk too much about their increase, the heart can slowly shift from gratitude to self-exaltation. Words have power. When you speak boastfully, even subtly, you begin to take credit for what God has done. Silence keeps the heart humble and reminds the soul that the blessing is not a personal achievement, but a divine trust. God resists pride, but He protects humility. Envy is another reason. Silence is essential. Not everyone who smiles at your blessing is happy for you. Some people carry hidden jealousy, and their negative thoughts, words, or attitudes can create unnecessary tension and spiritual opposition. While not everyone understands this, wisdom recognizes that silence is a shield. You do not need to make others understand your testimony before the time God has appointed. God knows how to defend what He gives. Comparison also enters when blessings are publicly displayed. When people know too much, they begin to measure your life against theirs. This invites pressure to maintain an image rather than live in obedience. The blessing becomes something you feel forced to protect with appearances instead of prayer. Silence frees you from the burden of people's expectations and keeps your focus on God rather than public opinion. Spiritual attacks often increase when blessings are exposed prematurely. The enemy is not threatened by empty talk, but he is alert to real progress. When God is working deeply, wisdom teaches restraint. Even Jesus often told people not to spread news of miracles immediately. He understood timing. Silence is not secrecy born of fear, it is alignment with God's timing. Remaining quiet allows discernment to grow. You learn who to trust, when to speak, and how to move carefully. In this way, silence becomes a form of stewardship. It keeps the blessing pure, the heart grounded, and the spirit sensitive to God's leading. When money comes from God, it carries a weight that goes far beyond personal comfort. It is not given as a possession to be owned, but as a responsibility to be managed. Many people misunderstand this and assume that blessing means complete freedom to spend without reflection. But in God's order, provision always comes with purpose. The money may be in your hands, but it still belongs to God, and He watches how it is handled. Understanding responsibility begins with recognizing stewardship. A steward does not act according to personal impulse, but according to the will of the one who entrusted the resources. When believers see money this way, their decisions change. They become careful, prayerful, and disciplined. They ask not only, can I afford this, but also, is this pleasing to God? Responsibility brings restraint, and restraint protects the blessing from waste and regret. Money from God also carries responsibility toward others. God often blesses one person so that many can be helped. This does not mean giving recklessly or allowing others to misuse you, but it does mean maintaining a generous heart. Responsibility requires discernment, knowing when to give, how to give, and to whom to give. A wise believer understands that generosity guided by God multiplies blessing, while generosity driven by emotion or pressure can drain it. Another aspect of responsibility is long-term thinking. Ownership mentality focuses on immediate enjoyment, but stewardship considers the future. Godly responsibility plans, saves, and prepares. It avoids debt that leads to bondage and avoids extravagance that leads to instability. This kind of wisdom is spiritual, not merely financial. It honors God by showing that His provision is being treated with respect. Responsibility also means accountability before God. Even when no one else sees your financial decisions, God sees them. He observes integrity in small purchases and large investments alike. This awareness produces reverence. The believer understands that every choice is part of a larger spiritual picture. When money is treated as an assignment rather than a possession, fear leaves and peace remains. There is no need to prove success or impress others. The heart rests, knowing that as long as God is honored, He remains the source. Responsibility keeps the blessing aligned with heaven's purpose and ensures that provision remains a tool for good rather than a burden to the soul. Wisdom is the invisible boundary that keeps God's blessing safe. Money by itself has no direction. It simply follows the heart and the mind of the one who holds it. When wisdom is absent, even a great blessing can quickly become a source of stress, loss, and regret. That is why God does not only give provision, He desires His people to grow in understanding, discernment, and spiritual sensitivity. Wisdom turns money from a temptation into a testimony. True wisdom begins with the fear of God. This does not mean fear of punishment, but deep reverence and awareness of God's presence in every decision. A wise person does not rush financial choices. They pause, pray, and listen. Impulsive decisions are often driven by emotion, pressure, or desire to impress, but wisdom is calm and patient. It protects the blessing by slowing the pace and aligning actions with God's will. Wisdom also teaches priorities. Without it, money is spent on what is loud, urgent, or attractive. With wisdom, money is directed toward what is necessary, meaningful, and lasting. The wise believer invests first in spiritual health, family stability, and long-term peace rather than short-term pleasure. This kind of thinking prevents regret and preserves joy. The blessing remains a support, not a burden. Another role of wisdom is discernment in relationships. Not everyone who approaches you after a breakthrough has pure intentions. Wisdom helps you recognize manipulation, pressure, and unhealthy dependence. It teaches you to say no without guilt and yes without fear. In this way, wisdom guards both the heart and the resources God has entrusted to you. The blessing remains free from bitterness and confusion. Wisdom also understands timing. There is a time to give, a time to save, a time to invest, and a time to wait. Acting too early or too late can damage even good intentions. Godly wisdom senses seasons. It knows that obedience at the right time is more powerful than generosity at the wrong time. This sensitivity keeps the blessing flowing under God's direction. When wisdom governs money, the blessing fulfills its purpose to glorify God and bring peace to the believer. Without wisdom, money controls the person. With wisdom, the person remains free, focused, and faithful, allowing God's provision to become a channel of lasting good. True prosperity does not distance a believer from God, it draws the believer closer to Him. When financial blessing is genuine and God-given, it creates a deeper awareness of dependence, not independence. Prayer does not decrease after the breakthrough, it intensifies. The heart understands that the same God who provided must also sustain. This awareness keeps the soul anchored and the blessing secure. Prayer becomes richer in seasons of increase because the believer now carries greater responsibility. There are more decisions to make, more people to impact, and more opportunities that require discernment. Without prayer, money easily leads to distraction and pride. With prayer, money becomes a servant rather than a master. The wise believer does not pray only for more, but prays for guidance, protection, and a clean heart. This kind of prayer guards against subtle spiritual decline. Humility is another fruit of true prosperity. Instead of creating superiority, blessing creates gratitude. The believer remembers past struggles and recognizes that everything came by grace. This memory protects the heart from arrogance. Humility keeps a person teachable, open to correction, and sensitive to God's voice. Even with abundance, the humble heart remains bowed before God, acknowledging that without Him, nothing would stand. Obedience deepens as well. Financial blessing creates more opportunities to obey God, especially in areas of generosity, integrity, and trust. Obedience is proven when giving feels costly, when honesty seems inconvenient, or when God asks for something that challenges comfort. True prosperity responds with a willing heart. The believer understands that obedience is not a loss but an investment in spiritual security. Gratitude also grows in genuine blessing. The believer learns to thank God not only for provision, but for wisdom, restraint, and peace. Gratitude shifts focus away from possessions and back to the provider. This protects the soul from greed and dissatisfaction. A grateful heart is content, even while growing. When prosperity produces prayer, humility, and obedience, it becomes evidence of God's work, not just financial success. This kind of blessing strengthens faith rather than weakens it, and keeps the believer aligned with God's purpose rather than personal ambition. God is faithful not only to give, but also to preserve what He gives. However, divine sustenance is closely connected to how a blessing is handled. What is managed with faithfulness attracts God's continued support. Faithfulness means consistency in honoring God, whether the amount is small or large. It is seen in daily decisions, quiet obedience, and a steady heart that does not change with circumstances. God watches for reliability more than brilliance. Gratitude is another key that keeps God's provision under His covering. A thankful heart recognizes that every good thing comes from God and refuses to take credit for itself. Gratitude protects the soul from entitlement, which is one of the greatest threats to lasting blessing. When a person remains thankful, even in abundance, the heart stays soft and receptive to God's guidance. Thanksgiving keeps the channel between heaven and earth open. Discernment is essential because not every opportunity is from God, even when money is available. Without discernment, people enter agreements, investments, or relationships that drain both resources and peace. Discernment listens to the inner witness of the Spirit rather than pressure, excitement, or fear of missing out. It teaches when to move forward and when to wait. This careful listening prevents costly mistakes and preserves God's provision. Faithfulness also includes integrity. God sustains what is clean. When money is handled honestly without manipulation, deceit, or compromise, it remains under divine favor. Even when no one else sees, integrity keeps the blessing protected. Shortcuts may seem profitable, but they weaken spiritual covering. God's way may appear slower, but it is safer and more secure. Discernment also helps balance generosity and wisdom. Giving should never be driven by guilt or public pressure. When guided by God, generosity brings joy rather than regret. Discernment ensures that giving strengthens purpose instead of enabling disorder. When faithfulness, gratitude, and discernment work together, God's provision remains stable and fruitful. The blessing does not become a burden, and the heart does not become anxious. God sustains what is handled in alignment with His nature, allowing provision to continue as a testimony of His grace and wisdom at work.